Good afternoon, USA, and welcome to another episode of the Bernie or Bust Show. Fueled today by pure cranberry, not from concentrate, organic juice. Unshaved, unbathed, unedited, and unscripted. I just mowed the grass, so that's where the unbathed part comes in. But I'll bathe shortly, I promise. It's a wonderful life. Are you sure? For most of us, our comfort is predicated on the fact that other people do much of our work for us. Food, clothing, shelter, transport. We don't actually do these things, at least not all of them, for ourselves. By working the system, some of us figure out how to operate using leverage in a way that allows more for those who figure out how to climb higher and less for those underneath. Some, the climbers and their descendants, end up having control of the way things work for everyone else. The rest end up with little control over how their lives work and end up doing pretty much what the climbers want them to do. Then the prophecy kicks in of, unto those who have more will be given, until the inevitable conclusion of the game of Monopoly is played out in real life. That prophecy, by the way, can be found in the book of Matthew. For whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have, will be taken from them. Sounds pretty true to me. As we near the end of the Monopoly game, fewer and fewer of us will have any say in how our lives play out until only one person owns Boardwalk, Park Place, all the railroads, and anything else of value. You may believe that such an outcome in life is inevitable. You may believe that a system that leads to some people being owners and others being owned is as natural as the fact that some animals are predators and others are prey. What we are not seeing is the evolution that over time led to the current state of affairs. We also are missing information about the intentions that may have led to this evolution, the intentions that have led to the way society currently is structured and how it functions. Picture a village, mythic or otherwise, where everyone pulls his or her own weight. There's a division of labor, but each adult person's contribution is both needed and appreciated. Now let's say that two new villagers wander in from neighboring villages. Each of them has a big pile of capital in the form of either money or something like gold or silver bullion that everyone will accept as payment. One of them is a developer. Think Mr. Potter in the movie It's a Wonderful Life. The other guy wants to start a savings and loan, someone like George Bailey's father. These two obviously have different ideas about the best way to use their capital. Now let's say that they proceed to deploy their capital in the same ways that are attempted in the movie It's a Wonderful Life. Mr. Bailey wants to help workers afford their own homes and businesses, whereas Mr. Potter wants everyone indebted to and working for him. Mr. Potter wants to own everyone else's means of production, whereas Mr. Bailey wants to help the villagers own their own means of production, homes, and other necessary household goods and equipment. Here's a picture of George talking to his dad. His dad's asking him, "I suppose you've decided whatever you want to do when you get out of college." Now, back to the opening idea of getting others to do our work for us. If only Mr. Bailey, and not Mr. Potter, were to come into town, our hypothetical village would be able to continue to exist in a situation where everyone had sovereignty over their own economic role, whilst continuing, some more, some less, to contribute to everyone else in the village. Everyone would choose their own line of work rather than being forced into it. Some villagers would be wealthier than others, but all would have control over the type of work they engaged in and would be able to choose how to deploy their own productivity. The invested capital would not necessarily lead to the enslavement of some by others because the intentions going in would be set up specifically to avoid that outcome, especially if everyone in the village collectively wanted to maintain their individual sovereignty. On the other hand, if the only newcomer had been this guy, had been Mr. Potter, he would have used his capital to simultaneously bribe and wheedle our villagers into situations where eventually their labor all would be harnessed directly to benefit him. In short, he would have repurposed the village from the initial situation where everyone worked directly for their own benefit in ways that contributed to the common good, into a situation where everyone's role would be chosen by Mr. Potter, who would also determine the proportion of each person's productivity that they would be allowed to keep. Eventually, no one but Mr. Potter would own any businesses, property, or equipment. They would buy all of their products directly from Mr. Potter, who also would determine their salaries, their rental rates for their, actually his, homes, and the interest rates on the debt they would need to incur from him to pay for the big ticket items that they would have to purchase from him. He would own the hospitals, car dealerships, doctors, lawyers, politicians, and farms. He would decide which pesticides to spray on the crops and the type of education that each child was afforded. He would decide how clean their air and water needed to be, and he would have cronies and minions whom he would favor in various ways according to their usefulness to him and according to how much control he could leverage over them as they did his bidding. Does that sound like freedom to you? The nature of freedom. In your view, is true freedom A, freedom from being bullied, or B, freedom to bully? Answering this question in today's society would require everyone to show their true colors. Specifically, it would require them to show how they feel about imperialism, whether that's local or global imperialism. For our purposes, imperialism is another word for Potter-type bullying. Sexism, racism, classism, and so forth, all are forms of bullying long condoned by the ruling elites, such as Mr. Potter. If we reject their freedom to bully, or our own freedom to bully, we are coming down on the only supportable side of the above question. If the bottom line then truly is freedom, we must be crystal clear about what freedom truly means. That is, we must decide whether we want the type of freedom that allows us all to avoid enslavement by people such as Mr. Potter, or if we prefer the type of freedom that would allow all of us to strive against each other in our own attempts to win the game of Monopoly and to become our own version of Mr. Potter. In the above article, Wall Street Democrats Want You to Hate Bernie Sanders, C.J. Atkins points out how Senator Bernie Sanders is coming at the issue of freedom and the motives of those who resist his vision. The vision represented by the Sanders campaign is bigger than Sanders, the candidate. It's a program that goes beyond electoral politics and aims at empowering working-class people to unite and fight for their own interests against a system that has been long tilted against them. It's important to keep in mind the larger context in which attacks on him are taking place. The target for many is not actually Bernie Sanders, the imperfect person, but rather the economic program and class-based politics that nearly overturned the 2016 Democratic presidential primary. That is exactly what the Wall Street Democrats are determined to prevent happening again. That's one quote. So if Bernie Sanders is someone who could set up our national village in a way that would remove Mr. Potter's power and give it to individuals, it is only obvious that the type of people who would resist Sanders' efforts are people who resemble Mr. Potter and his minions. People such as central bankers, hedge fund managers, Wall Street investors, CEOs of transnational corporations, big pharma, big health insurance, big cancer, big food, big chem, big oil, big carbon, big prisons, big military, big education, and on and on. That big cancer sounds like a crack. It is. This is a real article. Goldman Sachs asks in Biotech Research Report, is curing patients a sustainable business model? So if you did actually cure diseases, you'd be taking yourself out of the money loop. The other people who might resist Bernie Sanders are opportunity Democrats, such as Atkins again describes here. Last summer, Third Way, the center-left think tank that represents the interests of corporate America inside the Democratic Party, held an exclusive invitation-only conference to tell Democrats to stop talking about inequality. Quit worrying about how much the rich have and just encourage the working class and middle class to focus on moving themselves up the ladder. Become opportunity Democrats. The conference was bankrolled by New York real estate titan and billionaire Winston Fisher. The clear target of the whole shindig was the class struggle platform that Sanders and the movement behind him built in 2016, strengthened in 2018, and are set to deploy again in 2020. Once again, the time has come to mend, but not end, capitalism for a new era, Third Way President John Cowan told the crowd of movers and shakers. Ohio Congressman and potential presidential candidate Tim Ryan was even more blunt. You're not going to make me hate somebody just because they're rich. I want to be rich. Go Tim Ryan. Neoliberalism. For the purposes of this article, let's call Mr. Potter and his minions neoliberalism. Neoliberalism is an attitudinal disease that is rooted in predatory intent. Neoliberalism seeks the freedom to bully. If regular people intend to cure this disease whilst putting in place a different sort of national attitude that is not rooted in predatory, imperialistic type thinking, they will need to hold steadfast to their commitment not to bully each other and to their commitment never to allow others to rise up again and to become bullies at either the local, national, or global level. Individual and systemic bullying both must be outlawed. And it doesn't matter if the masses of people think of themselves as conservatives, liberals, or something else. What truly matters is their belief that imperialistic bullying is wrong, whether it takes the form of communism, socialism, capitalism, any other ism you can think of. The nomenclature is unimportant and typically confusing. And even the chosen system is less important than the intentions that underlie its framing and its eventual use. How to escape neoliberalism. We have 6, possibly 7 categories of voters who won't currently vote for any brand of neoliberal presidential candidate. These voters have no intention of carrying on the Clinton/Obama/Reagan/Bush legacy. For their own reasons, they don't trust that their interests will be advanced by it. Number 1, poor. Number 2, poorly educated. Number 3, Bernie or Trump. Number 4, Bernie or bust. Number 5, very young, aka the Bernie or bust generation. And number 6, true leftist intellectuals who understand predatory capitalism/neoliberalism. A possible 7th category is Democratic Socialists of America. They recently narrowly passed a weak T Bernie or bust resolution. It isn't completely ruled out that they then could vote for Elizabeth Warren, and there aren't that many of them, so that's why it's a weak T resolution. They are the smallest of the categories mentioned. The very young are first-time voters above. The Bernie or bust generation is comprised of somewhere between 220,000 to over 1 million by our estimate. Millennials prefer Bernie, but would probably vote blue, especially if it's Elizabeth Warren against Trump, if it were to come to that. Older vote blue folks, mostly, who aren't the actual movers and shakers of the DNC, because the DNC insiders would much rather have Trump than Bernie, they say that they will vote for Bernie if it comes to it in the general election. But they don't trust Bernie to maintain the status quo that favors them, and they don't identify with him socioeconomically the way they do with Elizabeth Warren. These older, better educated, elitist voters still hold to the idea that somebody has to do those jobs. I'm backing myself up here, and you can see some of these words are underlined. They're hot links to videos, especially by Crystal Ball of the Hill and Tim Black of Tim Black Television. And you can, if you go to this article I'm quoting from I'll put it under the video. Then you can click on these links and you can find all of this for yourself. I'm not just pulling this out of thin air. Better educated elitist voters have shown in polls already that they're the ones who prefer the faux aggressive Elizabeth Warren. If these same vote blue voters could be persuaded to vote for Bernie in the primaries instead of Elizabeth Warren, we would at least have a non-evil candidate instead of a lesser evil candidate to face Donald Trump. Yes, Elizabeth Warren is evil because she is knowingly complicit with the DNC Clinton machine, Third Way John Cowan, Center for American Progress Neera Tanden, and Wall Street types who finance her campaign, her billionaire donors. Crystal Ball and Tim Black are right that the powers have shifted over and have chosen Warren over Beto O'Rourke and Pete Buttigieg. If you view many of their videos, and other people too are saying the same thing, it's clear that I'll read this. The establishment powers already know that they can't keep propping Joe Biden up all the way to next November, and Tulsi Gabbard probably has dealt a mortal blow sufficient to remove Kamala Harris from the hunt. And you can watch those videos if you click on them here in this article. If the older vote blue voters will not come around in time, mobilizing poor and poorly educated voters as well as new voters and making sure that they all vote in the Democratic primaries is the only other hope. The Bernie or bust generation is at least 220,000 voters. We must reach them in time to turn a potential protest vote into a revolutionary movement. And while we're here, Revolt against Plutocracy's Bernie or bust movement, of which I'm a part, could use donations of any size in order to employ the legacy mediums of television, radio, and newspapers in that order. We need to work together to educate all of the above-mentioned Bernie-leaning constituents as well as the comfortable vote blue elitist Democrats so that they can see that a new course of action is required. Please make a donation to Revolt Against Plutocracy to help spread the word. It really could be a wonderful life if we all can work together to make it so. In the end, it will come down to the type of freedom that we all are willing to fight for.